Gracious memory of danger, sent from somewhere in my soul.
Excommunication, the trickle-down effect. While it's true that a century earlier, back in the homeland of the Mennonite ancestors, psychiatry was growing as a study, it eluded the congregants in the Greenwood community. Ironically, during the Vietnam War, many Mennonite men from that community did 2 years of voluntary service in mental hospitals to avoid the draft. Despite this fact, these men seemed less equipped as pacifists than if they had battled in the Bulge. Don's father became clearly sick, and in 1974 he was excommunicated by the church. Historically, pastors often took on responsibilities they were ill-equipped for: reconciliation work, financial advisor, medical advice and healing, marriage counseling, and assorted other tasks. In the Mennonite church, the congregation submitted a small selection of names. Sometimes they practiced lots. Slips of paper were inserted into a Bible. The nominated man that pulled the longest piece became the pastor.
And some of you remember the evening, probably, when the Lord chose me to be the bishop and pastor of the Greenwood Church through drawing a lot, middle of November 1970.
They have an unwilling clergy that is chosen by casting lots. So if we want to decide who's the pastor of the church, who's preaching, nobody wants to do it.
Those of you who had to listen to me preach, and that's love. I love to preach. And that's one thing I miss, being retired, but I can listen to other preachers, so that's doing all right.
During the 70s, a branch of psychology was developing. The biblical counseling movement rooted much of its techniques in New Testament theology. But it had the dilemma of trying to discern psychological trauma, spiritual weakness, or both. And for Christians that believed in Satan, there was the questions of demon possession. In the New Testament, mental and physical illness accounts are blurred with sin and demon possession. Around the time of the excommunication, some of pastors attempted to do an exorcism for Don's father. It was deemed unsuccessful. Taking Holy Communion was an emotionally precarious experience. Only members could take communion.
In those moments, I wanted to crawl through the bench and run outside of the church and sprint for the woods. But instead, I would pull out paper and draw pictures of faraway places I could escape to. This was at a time when feeling acceptance was such a big deal.
We're your pals. Remember when you were sick? We brought you fruit.
Yeah, then you sat on my bed and ate it.
I felt the aftershock of my father's excommunication, and I would turn to my own faith. I don't remember my older 2 siblings and my younger 2 siblings being a part of the drama. It felt like it was just my father and I.
The humiliation is emphasized with the nudity and the fire engine red on a black and white canvas. The tears stain the grain of the church bench. The seat that provides spiritual rest becomes an escape hatch. The judgment becomes a mythical serpent, with toxic social fangs.
I don't think I suffered from religious trauma syndrome from those Mennonite years. For the most part, it feels like there was no real antagonist. They did not understand the science of psychology. And so they looked to spiritual solutions. They were in over their head. They just didn't know what to do.
At the front of the church is the ruling patriarchal power, unidentified and in the shadow. The bishop figure beckons a repentant spirit and offers his holy kiss. He means no menace, but the injuries are just as real. Don's father was in good company. Many great people have been excommunicated from Christian churches. Thomas Müntzer was a reformer who preached against social inequality and excommunicated as a heretic. Mary Dyer was an activist for religious freedom and was eventually an excommunicate in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Don's father did not experience shunning in the tradition of the Amish. The Mennonites excommunicate with goal of repentance and to reinstate into the church. The leadership was waiting for him to make a public apology for behavior during the worst years of his mental illness. He stayed a non-member most of his life. Regardless, he faithfully attended that same church all of his life.
When my mother suffered a mental illness in the late 50s and early 60s, it was hard because there was so little to understand at that time about mental illness, and yet you as a church community rallied around my parents and prayed for them faithfully and supported them as she recovered from that over the next 10 years. And she gave a lot of credit to you as a community for that, for supporting her and praying for her, even though you didn't always understand.